Hey, here we are. We're live. Jimi D and the Wolf.
Yo! Happy belated Independence Day, everybody.
Yeah, it was a lot of fireworks in my neighborhood. People going off with their firecrackers. How about
Did you
up
see
in
the thing
Indiana?
where what they? Oh yeah, it's everywhere here. You know, in the Midwest, there's patriotism still very much alive and well. So there's more patriotic people than not in this part of the country. So there was fireworks everywhere. Even last night when I was trying to fall asleep, they're going on all over my neighborhood and stuff. And I saw a video in Los Angeles where they had told them not to light fireworks, you know, and the whole city was going up. Everybody was lighting them up from their backyards and stuff. It was nice. I mean, we have a boat race, a music festival that's sort of, you know, maybe the biggest deal of our town because Madison, Indiana has its own hydroplane boat and it's owned by the city itself. It's called Miss Madison. And it's very successful. In fact, we usually win the whole thing here recently, like the last 10 or 15 years. They've dominated the sport. And we didn't have that this year. You know, the festival got canceled due to COVID, but they still had the fireworks, the American Legion fireworks. And we watched the fireworks from a friend's house where I was playing music. And it was nice, man, because in 2020, it's like anything that seems normal is a very welcome thing just for your psychology. Anything we can do that just makes us feel like we're still, you know, some sense of normalcy is huge for me. And it was great to see those fireworks.
Yeah,
But I was happy.
I went to Waffle House this morning, and which is I like Waffle House. I mean, I get tired of their food. To me, it's inexpensive, but their menu is limited, and they have the same thing, and it all has the same kind of taste. I know if you come here, you always are excited when we go to Waffle House because you don't have one in Indiana. But there's really no other real breakfast options. I mean, I guess so. Anyway, I didn't go on. I mean, I love Waffle House. I love going there. I'm glad it's close to my house, and I love going there, and it's inexpensive. They know me. You've seen it. We walk in there and say, "Hey, Tim." They know me because I go there a lot. But I noticed today. Remember when you were there? They had these plastic sheets between booths. Remember that?
Sure.
And they didn't have them. And I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Well, we went back to 50%. We went back to phase 2. The governor or the mayor, I don't remember which, is the mayor or is it the governor, went backwards in the COVID prevention. You know, because there was, like you said, you had phase 4. What were you at, 3.5 or 4.5?
We were at stage 4, and we were literally supposed to go to stage 5 on Independence Day, July 4th. So I had 3 shows booked and all kinds of shows booked this coming week, and I'm looking at it like, awesome, you know, back in the game, back to work. And like 2 days before Independence Day, the governor comes on, and he's done in my opinion, he's done a pretty good job handling it, all things considered. And we're not getting hit near as hard where I'm at as many parts of the country. But he comes out 2 days before Independence Day and says, well, we're not going to stage 5. We're going to stage 4.5. So I'm going, what exactly does that mean? It's like, well, everything else is going to stage 5 essentially, except no gatherings of more than 250 people, and bars and restaurants can't go to full capacity. So it's like, okay, stage 4.5 means you can do anything except for play music.
But DJs can still go? Can you still have DJs?
DJs can still go. So at least it's in writing officially now that DJs aren't musicians. That's the only good thing that's come from this whole lockdown thing.
I do love that. Yeah, that's almost worth it.
Unreal. You know, the industry as a whole, it's just crumbling. I mean, everybody's suffering in the entertainment industry. Everybody. It's falling apart.
not just music. It's even plays and musicals and I mean, people like take. I'm friends on Facebook with a woman who's big on cruise entertainment, and she made a post talking about how all of her friends, because she was big on, she was actually the director of on the cruise of some of the events that they had, music director in charge of the event, and cruises are canceled. And so if that was your livelihood, and even I was thinking this morning, because I usually go to the dentist 3 times a year, every 4 months, and I haven't been to the dentist. I've missed the appointment, and I don't even know if they're open. I mean, can you go to? I wonder if you can go to the dentist. Can you go to get a cleaning?
I went 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
I went a couple of weeks ago. You had to do the peroxide rinse and the whole bit, and they were very meticulous.
Probably, and I need to get back on that schedule because I'm not as rigorous as I should be on all of that, and so I kind of make do by going to having them do a deep clean 3 times a year. Anyway, yeah, I was thinking about that. That's really close. Yeah, and so I was getting a haircut. I mean, I went to get my haircut after I let it grow for like 2-3 months, and they wouldn't let me in the building without a mask. And so I've been starting to wear a mask now. I think it's a good idea.
I agree.
Not to. I mean, no reason not to. So
I agree. Well, it's interesting. We're so like climatized to be skeptical as Americans. We're inundated with information to the point to where I think Americans are just skeptical as a whole. Like our BS meter is always on high as Americans. And I think a lot of people, or at least for me personally, there was a little bit of that thing of, okay, COVID's real, it's legit, but I don't know anybody that's had it. So how is it going to affect me directly? And that whole climate has changed for me personally, because now I've known people that have lost family members and people that have passed on. And one of my dear friends, his granddaughter has it right now. My brother, half brother, his sister and her husband and 2 children have it. So now my entire mindset about this thing is like, whoa, it almost has to hit close to home for people to really take it as seriously as they should.
Yeah, I guess the closest it's come for me is the neighbor back home in South Dakota, the neighboring farmer. He and his wife are in their early 50s. I never met his wife because I knew him before he married. But we're friends on Facebook. He doesn't post very often, but his wife got ill and wasn't feeling well. They took her to the emergency room, and she was dead in 12 hours. And they didn't know what it was, but they did a test posthumously, and she had COVID-19, and that was the cause of death, is what they determined. And devastating. I mean, she was still very healthy, apparently, had kids, and there's pictures on their Facebook page of the kids getting married and stuff. And I mean, I think their kids were like early 20s. And so, certainly not ready to die. And her husband, I mean, devastated as any man would be. So that's the nearest. I mean, and it's just amazing how that happened so quickly. And it 12 hours. I mean, she wasn't feeling well, and basically, if I get the story correctly, because it was hard to piece it together. So I talked to a friend of mine who's from South Dakota, and he knows the family, and he told me a little bit of the inside story. He said she wasn't feeling well, and said, and I'm not really feeling well. Take me to the emergency room, and she was dead within 12 hours. That's unusual, right? I mean, there are a lot of cases where it takes. It's slow. You get on a ventilator, and they say if you get on a ventilator, there's 85% probability you're never coming off it. Well, you are coming off it, but as a dead body.
Yeah, exactly right.
Everybody comes off a ventilator eventually. They don't bury you with it.
Well, I think that's, the most terrifying thing about it is we're used to having so much data that prior to this, something like this were to happen, we look towards the experts. We look towards the scientists and medical professionals. And they have all this information, and you can kind of take a deep breath. Oh, they know what they're doing. They know what this is all about. And this is such a strangely different new thing that when the scientists are like, hey, we don't know. We haven't figured it out yet. That's terrifying.
Well, there's so much distrust of media. I mean, we have more information and more science and more technology than ever in the history of the world, but people don't trust it or believe it. And I actually feel, I'm trying to remember which president signed it into law, but I think it was around the Reagan era, where we used to have a law which required all media outlets to show both sides of a story. That was a requirement by law. Back in the Walter Cronkite days, 60s, Walter Cronkite was, and that's, well, he had his famous sign off, what was it? And that's the way it is, or something like that. He was, everybody trusted him. There's never been a tell-all. I don't know if he had secrets behind the face, but there was a law that everything, if you had a particular position, you had to have equal time to the other side. And that was repealed. And since then, now you can literally find your whatever flavor you're after. If you're right wing, left wing, popular,
right.
whatever, you can just be inundated with that and immersed in it and never hear any opposing thought. And that has really radicalized. And then you can get support for your own views. And so I believe that has made everybody more distrustful of actual, and we're more reliable with our technology. I mean, we have more technology. I mean, the technology in this phone is more than all the computers in all the rooms they had when we landed on the moon.
Sure.
I mean, you could do all those calculations with this phone, and it'd be like having one hand tied behind his back, because it wouldn't even make it work. And they used whole room computers to make those calculations. And I heard one time that when they went to the moon, the Apollo 11 was on target only 2% of the time. They were constantly correcting, and they landed there. Obviously made it. But it was a motivational thing. You don't have to be 100% on target. Anyway, that was a rabbit trail there a little bit.
No, I like it. I like it. That gives me quite a bit of hope, knowing that it was only on target 2% of the time. Because that's about how often I'm on target.
If I can, here's another stat that talk about 2%. This is completely unrelated, but it's related to both of our careers. I was reading Ari Herstand's book, which any artists out there, musical artists, you have to, if you haven't read Ari Herstand's book, if you don't have a copy of it, shame on you, because if you're an independent artist, it is the foundation for, anyway, so he has in his book, and I don't know the source for this information, but Ari Herstand is pretty credible. Among independent musicians, he doesn't blow any smoke. So I would pretty much trust what he would say, but he said that of all musicians, artists that get signed to a record label, 98% lose that deal, fail to lose that deal. 98%. So that was back 2%. 2% keep that deal. And the whole model of the record industry is really, they've had chances. I've heard articles on this that look at it from a really business oriented. They really are effed up about how I shouldn't have said that, but anyway, they've really screwed up about how they have run their business, and they really focus on, they all say we're going to we're going to sign all these artists, but we're really only looking for the Post Malones, Bruno Mars,
Sure.
Ariana Grande's, And those are going to be the ones who are going to pay the bills, and all the rest we're going to put on the shelf. I mean, there's a lot of artists that get signed. They even record an album, and that album doesn't even ever get get released. I mean, if I would, and Ari actually recommends only sign with a major label, independent label a little different, but a major label if you meet certain criteria. You're at a certain level, and you need that extra boost, because they do have firepower, but they have relationships. But everything that they do, most of it, except for money, they all operate as a bank. If you can access the cash, like you can access everything that major label has with the cash. So they put, a lot of artists have recorded an album, and that album never got released. Do you know anybody like that had a deal and the album never got released?
It happens all the time. That artists get shelved. And another thing that happens that's unfortunate is that oftentimes they'll put a deadline on an album. This is what happened to the Spin Doctors. The Spin Doctors came out with their album. They get the major deal, and the label says, we need another album in 6 months. Well, they needed 1.5 years to get another good album together. And the label will put a deadline on it. And so oftentimes it's like that sophomore slump thing isn't necessarily usually the artist's fault or the band's fault. That has more to do with the labels themselves. Oftentimes. Now, not every time, but oftentimes. I mean, how many times have you seen it? An act releases an album and it's really strong. It's got great content, and they've got, if they release a 10-song thing, and I know this is a different day and age, but back then it was 10 songs on an album, and if 5 of them were good, you're like, man, this is an incredible album. And they were forcing their hand with the artists, which I think was, the beginning of the end for those guys, because indie labels weren't doing that to their rosters. They were allowing them to take more time. Now, the climate of all that is different now, because it's more singles and 6-packs, or releasing 3 songs at a time. But there's been many bands that I think their future would have looked exponentially different if they would have had that time to nurture their second release. And once that second one bombs, it's over. Those guys get one shot at it.
Ari mentions one of his case in point examples is Bruce Springsteen. I mean, most people who are rock fans, whether you like Bruce or not, have to recognize that he's an iconic second half of the 20th century rock artist. I mean, there's no doubt that he's way up there on his firepower and the influence that he's had, and staying power even. I mean, he's one of the greats. He's one of the greats of the greats, and he stayed relevant. He had that Broadway show that just killed. His final night on that Broadway show, the tickets everybody wanted to see his final run as a solo show on Broadway. The guy's in his, I think he's in his 70s now, and those tickets were going for thousands upon thousands of dollars. I don't remember the figure. It was like $8,000 for a ticket to his last show on Broadway, because everybody didn't want to miss it. And anyway, back to the point, his first 2 albums absolutely flopped. Completely flopped. And the label believed in him and gave him a chance to come out with the album that had Born to Run on it. Is that the name of the album? I don't remember. But
I think so. What's the odds of something like that happening today?
Not going to happen. Not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
No way.
Exactly right.
Not going to happen with a major label. So, yeah. So anyway, 2%. We were talking about 2%. Being on target, 2%. 2% of artists that are signed. So, I mean, I've been at writers' nights or open mic nights. I remember going to one up in Hendersonville, and there was a guy that came in wearing construction clothes, and was that you? No, it wasn't me. I don't Wink.
That was my son. That was young Memphis.
Anyway, got lost my train of thought. Where were we?
The Writers' Night in Hendersonville.
Oh yeah. Yeah, some guy comes in. He's wearing construction clothes, and the person next to me said, "That guy, he had a label deal." Well, he obviously doesn't have one now because he's coming. He's got a day job. Well, a lot of label. There was another stat that I saw. The average income for people with label deals is $10,000 a year.
So
if you do, maybe.
And even, it's a thing though, that everybody that's been in the music business for 10 years or more, there's a general sort of unspoken thing of if you've got a deal, if you got a writer's deal, if you're a side guy, if you're in a band, whatever it is you're doing, and the music business, it's sort of a common knowledge thing after you get some experience with it, that every single person at any given time is in danger of losing their gig. You're in danger of losing your gig as a side guy. Any minute, the band leader could, can you get somebody else? If you've got a writing deal, you're in danger of losing that for somebody that's getting more cuts. If you're a session musician,
how many people
you're in danger of losing that for the young hotshot, musician. You're always in danger of losing that job at any given time, which is maddening. And I mean, it affects musicians on a psychological level in a big way. There's studies that have been done with that, that it's not a good profession for your mental health.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're always losing our gig.
The best solution to that is to be an artist, or even if you're just an instrumentalist, and build a following and do that using social media and find your tribe, find those 1,000 super fans who will spend $100 a year on your merch, your music, your experiences of one-on-ones, Skypes, Patreon, whatever it would be. $100 a year times 1,000 is $100,000, and that's not that difficult to do. I haven't done it.
That's the new way to do it, man. That's the new way to do it. And the people that support you, that come to your shows, they'll keep buying your stuff.
Yeah, people identify.
You've said it before. You don't need 1 million fans to give you, $1. You need 1,000 super fans.
Yeah. So that's a new model that you can pursue, and that other artists can do. Now, talking about laborers, if I can segue, there was an article in the yesterday's New York Times about the entire editorial section about how the economy has changed for how to save, the title of it is How to Save Democracy from Capitalism and Save Capitalism from Itself. And I know there's a lot of dialogue out there of socialism versus capitalism, and especially in the conservative sector. And I'm conservative, socially conservative, but I'm probably more middle of the road when it comes to economic, because I've been in other countries, and I've seen we have no safety net in this country, and there are a lot of things, but it gets said that a lot of the things that other countries have, we shouldn't try because we are exceptional, or whatever their argument would be. Or even from the extreme left side, you can't just give things away. There has to be a combination of capitalism Anyway, I've said this before, no country in the world has pure capitalism, because pure capitalism would have the Adam Smith invisible hand deciding things. We have regulations. We have some social safety nets. We have social security. That's not pure capitalism. Capitalism would have everything completely market driven. And there is no economy in the world that is true socialism. No economy, not even China, not Russia, because
every country is an amalgamation of both.
Yeah, it's somewhere on that.
Every country, most of the developed countries.
Actual real socialism is the people or the government owns all means of production. And even in China, there's private companies. Even in Russia, there's private companies. So they aren't pure socialism or communism. So everything is a continuum between. And some key dates that changed in our country, because here's an example, especially for blue collar workers. I mean, the 1% are doing great in this economy. And let's take, for example, since this pandemic started, the stock market crashed, and it is now back to its heights of where it was. And there's one reason for that, because of this bailout, which we're going to have to pay for eventually. I think there were $3 trillion allocated towards buying back bonds and stocks. And the stocks were these instruments that where bonds are bundled together. I think they call them EFTs. That's what they're called. And they get bundled together and they get sold on the stock market. I mean, we've got since we've got double-digit unemployment, and nobody's working. The economy is definitely contracting. There's no reason for the stock market to be at the heights that it is, except for the fact that all that money that has gone into $3 trillion, and that doesn't help the average worker. The average worker doesn't have a stock market portfolio. And so what's changed, the focus, we all need to wake up and realize that it's only the elite that are gaining on the backs of what we're doing. So let's take an example. 20 years ago, in $20, a person working in a meatpacking plant made $24 an hour at $20. Today, they make $14 an hour. And it's hard work. If you ever talk to anybody working a meat packing plant, and it's hard work, and they put out more pounds of meat per hour or per measurement of hour. I mean, they're more productive than they were, but they're getting paid about half of what they were. And that's somewhat typical. A lot of people have to work multiple jobs, and it's not possible for a normal family to survive on one income. It's just not possible.
Right.
And some of the things that have changed about that is back when I started with DuPont, back in the 80s, I'm old, DuPont was called Uncle Doopy, and corporations were much more towards taking care of their people. In fact, in general, back in the 50s, General Motors was considered, the paragon of corporate America. And I mean, the saying was, as General Motors goes, so goes America, back in the 50s. I mean, they had a majority of the car market share. And back then, in their annual reports, they would talk about just not about the amount of money they made per share, but the money they were giving to suppliers, how they were treating their employees, that sort of a thing. And when I started with DuPont in the 80s, DuPont was called Uncle Doopy. Because no matter what, I mean, if they had a manager who was having alcohol problems, they would literally be with that individual and pay them while they went for a counseling or to go somewhere. And Uncle Doopy was there to take care. And you were in the family, you were going to get taken care of. And in return, you were expected to stay there for the rest of your career. I mean, everybody it was a career, and that was still even in the 80s, which was kind of had a lot of corporate America had dropped away from that. But one of the key things that happened, Milton Friedman, who's a famous economist, put out an article in the 70s that said that companies should focus on profits for their shareholders and not focus on their employees. Back then, I even remember being it explained to me when I first started with DuPont. Someone explained to me, he says, we need to take care of our employees because they will then be consumers as well of our own products, and it's a rising tide lifts all boats. Well,
Yes.
You won't find that in today's corporate America. The employees are just a number. And corporate America focuses on shareholders, not employees or other stakeholders. And even in corporate America, even in high tech, if you say like Google, Google's a very prosperous company, right? One of the largest companies in the world. More than half of the people that work at Google don't work for Google. They're under contract. And when you don't work for the company, you don't get all those benefits. So the contract employees or employers don't pay those benefits, don't give you sick leave, all those sort of things. And let me see if I can find the date. In 1982, the Securities and Exchange Commission, led by a Wall Street banker for the first time since the Great Depression, provided a new way for corporations to shovel money to shareholders by letting companies buy back their stocks. That was in 1982. Big change. And since then, I think in one recent year, $1 trillion was spent in buying back stocks. That money could have been spent on paying more money to employees, that sort of a thing. So we've had a major change in how corporations treat Americans. And another thing is chief executives of American corporations in the mid-60s, the median salary of a corporation and then the chief executive made 20 times what the median salary was. By 2018, it was 278 times.
Whoa.
So, that's again the 1%, the elite of the elite, the 1% of the 1%. So what has changed? Are the CEOs that much more important? That they deserve to get paid 10 times more than they were back in the 60s? So these are some major changes that have affected the common worker, and the elite is doing well, very well, but the rest of us,
they're making more money. They're making more money through this whole COVID thing than ever.
Oh yeah, the elite are not being heard. It's hard out there for a blue collar worker.
Amen, brother.
I'm co-opting that. What was that movie? Academy Award-winning song by 3 6 Mafia. It's hard out here for a pimp.
Yeah. Life ain't easy, especially in 2020. Well, but hopefully we'll have NBA back soon, though, right? Are they still doing that? Are they still bringing it back?
22nd, I heard, but I keep hearing mixed signals on. I mean, I think I haven't seen an article on it in a while. Hey Jeff, how's it going? Anyway, so are you tired of this subject?
Not at all.
One more fact is that over 40% of the Americans who use government food stamps have a member of their household who is employed, but whose compensation isn't enough to otherwise get by. Outside groups have estimated that low-wage workers at Walmart and Amazon, two of the country's largest employers, rely heavily on public assistance, such as food stamps and Medicaid. For some, even working a full-time job is not enough to support a family without public assistance. So, democracy requires a functioning democracy requires a robust middle class, and we are losing the middle class in this country. It's the haves and the have.
We're not losing it; it's being murdered.
So many other, healthcare costs we pay double as a percent of GDP, what most developed countries pay, and we have demonstrably less results. Preventable disease deaths in this country are higher than in other developed countries. And what defenders, conservatives will often say, well, people are coming from other countries to have health care here. And that's the super wealthy. Super wealthy are fine. If you have money, you'll get some of the best healthcare in the world, maybe the best, especially in some disciplines like healthcare. But if we're talking about if all Americans matter, the average is low. Do you know that the average doctors per capita in this country is below the norm, below the median for developed countries? We don't have that many doctors compared, and especially bad in rural areas, red states, if you will, which are more rural. The doctors per capita are woefully inadequate. And that's a hot button. Nobody wants to talk about that. But you know, I think more than half of the people who work in the medical industry aren't even medical professionals. They're paper pushers. So, you know, we have a system that is so bloated. I don't know the solution. Well, I have some ideas for a solution, but
we got a long way to go for sure.
Tammy Scott Webb says we lost those jobs to other countries in the 90s. They all moved to Mexico and China. Yeah, there's definitely that. Yeah, we lost a lot of jobs by globalization. Was was something that was being pushed by our government, and it was actually it was a Republican thing. It was a conservative thing because they were the party of business, big business, and everybody went along with it. So globalization was the byword. I mean, open border. I mean, not open borders, but open trade is what I mean to say. Open trade and less tariffs. Rising tide raises all boats was what the idea was, and now it's coming back to bite us. Yeah, Jeff says, growing up in South Dakota, the rich kids' dads worked at an Armour's meatpacking plant, $17 an hour in 1974. Yeah, I remember growing up in Huron. The people that worked at Armour's, that was a wanted job. Everybody wanted that job, and if you worked at Armour's, you were a well-off family. Now, that ain't the case.
It was the same thing here with the power plants. The people that worked in the power plants, those were the rich kids' dads. And now, if you're working at the power plant, you know you're keeping the lights on, and you own your home, but it's nothing like it was then. It's all relative.
So, what's the solution? But we can't. We have so much unrest in this country. We have so much unrest in this country, and people are unhappy. I read a stat that said I don't remember the exact numbers, but the percentage of people of all parties in this country that think the country is going in the right direction is the lowest it's been since they've been measuring this. I think it's like 20% of Americans think the country is going in the right direction. And of course, everybody has probably, if you ask each individual, they have separate things about what is wrong with what the country is going towards. But in general, people are not happy with where we're going. And what are we going to do to change it? I mean, the American dream was that everybody could succeed. I mean, the millennials are saying that if you read some articles or some posts, they're saying, you know, we can't. The millennial generation is the first generation to be less well off than the previous generation, and
they're pretty smart. And many of them are saying we're not even going to participate. You know, there's a general consensus amongst many young people that they feel like the fight is fixed, and they're not even going to play that game. Yeah, which is why many of them don't want possessions and things like that. You know,
right? Yeah. So, one thing that happened in the turn of the century, 1900s. I mean, if you look at I've seen some attempts at ranking the richest individuals in the history of the world. And that's an inexact science, because how do you rank, you know, in antiquity, how much money King Solomon had, you know, or you know, back in Egypt, King Tut or whatever. How do you possibly do that? But to the best of their ability, using all resources, I've seen people trying to rank based on $20 or whatever, 21st century dollars, the wealthiest people in the history of the world. And I've seen a number of different lists, but invariably in the top 10, there'll be a handful, as many as 5, that came from the turn of the 20th century. People like Rockefeller, Carnegie, those sort of things. And they were often called robber barons from that era because there was no strictures on what they could do. It was capitalism unfettered. And workers had no power. They were working in dangerous conditions. And what broke that, a couple of things happened to break that, was unions came on, unions were formed that forced them to give better working conditions. And also there was monopoly trust busting. I think it was the Roosevelt, Teddy. Teddy was a big trust buster. He's on the Mount Rushmore. And some say that it should have been the other Roosevelt on Mount Rushmore. But anyway, I'm from South Dakota, so Mount Rushmore. But is in my home state. A lot of people don't know that. People think it's in Montana or Wyoming. Anyway, there was some radical changes, and it became more of a level playing field for workers. And do we need that again? I mean, I don't know.
I think so.
We need some radical change. And so the general prosperity was more spread out to the general populace. And it's been creeping back the other direction by a lot of things that have happened. You know, like the Milton Friedman came out in the 70s saying that corporations should be worried about only what their shareholders, paying to their shareholders instead of worried about their employees. And then being able to buy back stocks was a big thing. I mean, why are corporations spending money on buying back stocks when they could be spending that money on paying better wages or what have you? These are some levers that have been pulled to make things the way they are today.
Yeah. Well, it's like the Bob Marley.
Jeff, I knew my buddy Jeff knows these things. $4 trillion. I said 3. I was wrong by $1 trillion. $4 trillion to bail out the Dow and the Standard & Poor's, the Nasdaq. $3 trillion for the rest of America. That's what I was talking about. I had the number off. I was off by $1 trillion. That's why the stock market is doing so well, right, Jeff? Because all that money went into the stock market. That's why the stock market is back to record highs, even though we've got double-digit unemployment and the economy is contracting on a quarterly basis. When we get the numbers for the second quarter, it's going to be ugly. I think it's going to be like minus 8% growth, somewhere in that range. Truman went home and lived on $13,700 a year. Now lobbyists pay to keep people in office till they are millionaires, and that lobbying is pulling the cash from everyone to a very few. Absolutely right, Jeff. Absolutely. So what are we going to do? Well, we got to talk about it first, make people aware of it, and get away from the
exactly.
Partisan. The thing that blows my mind is how conservatives buy, whatever the Republican Party is saying, which is really only good for the elite, but yet most of the Trump supporters are blue collar workers. I mean, they're not all of Trump supporters are blue collar workers, but the biggest block of his core base are of a blue collar worker base. I mean, he didn't win the college educated. He won the blue collar white male blue collar was his biggest base. He won votes in a lot of the other categories. I'm not denying that, but the core base that really supports him was our blue collar workers. And many of the policies that he's implemented actually, and not just him, but even before that have been going on for years, are not benefiting the general populace. So we need to, actually, Tucker Carlson came out, and he had a dialogue where he said that people have to demand more from Republicans because they're neglecting the middle class. Now, his first part was he had 3 points, and his first 2 parts were railing against Democrats. But the third part is really interesting to me. He was saying that the Republicans have failed the general working class, and I think that's a really important part. So Tammy says because he's bringing jobs back. I'm assuming you're talking about Trump bringing jobs back. The unemployment rate has gone down before COVID, it's true, but at the average, a lot of jobs where the wage growth has been stagnant for the last 40 years. Wage growth hasn't been improving. It's been stagnant on an inflation adjusted base. And nobody talks about, they talked about this during the Obama era, but the labor participation rate is not very high. A lot of people have just given up on working. So the labor participation rate is higher than it was at the depth of the recession that came from 2008, but it's still woefully low. And it's especially really low for African Americans, labor participation rate, because there's a lot of them that are incarcerated, and that's a whole other subject, or giving up looking for work. So if you take all working class Black Americans versus all working class white Americans, Black Americans make on average 51 cents for every dollar that white Americans make. So we're getting some interesting comments. Can you see the comments?
Yeah.
It's polarized. People are polarized. Lowest unemployment rate and lowest Black unemployment rate, but the labor participation rate by the Blacks is woefully low. So, and the unemployment rate doesn't take into account the labor participation rate. It's only even the one, there's different unemployment rates, and even the one that tries to encompass as much as possible, the most, still only counts people who are actively looking for work. But if you look at the labor participation rate of people who are, of all the working class people in that age range, we've got incredibly low labor participation rate across all races, and especially across African Americans. So a lot of people have given up looking for work, even before COVID-19. Labor participation rate is still fairly low, very low actually, historically low. Not quite as low as it was during the Obama era, right after the recession, but it's still like 64, 63%. That's quite low historically.
I love this saying, with our brain tied behind our back. I never heard that before. That's great.
Oh, Jeff, you're wonderful.
That one's going in the vault, man. I'm going to remember that for the rest of my life.
Well, my purpose, and I think your purpose, is not to be divisive at all. I mean, I don't want
not at
to
all. It's always more complex. It's always more complex than a yes or no. It's always more. It's not a light switch, you know. These are very complex matters and very complex issues, and I think we just try to, you know, discuss them as such and honor them for what they are.
Yeah, I am concerned about the deficit that we have. I mean, we ran up a huge deficit even during good times, which is typically not considered a good idea, because then you have to pay the piper when it comes time when you have a recession. And, you know, even with all that deficit, we still only average for the first 3 years of the Trump administration a growth rate of about 2.5%. And that's not that great. Average GDP growth rate during the first 3 years before COVID hit, I think it comes out at 2.4, 2.5%. And Obama averaged over 8 years, 2.2. So they're almost the same. When Obama came in, it was minus 2% growth. So he was deep in the hole, and he still managed to average 2.2. So in spite of the fact that President Trump says that he has the greatest economy ever in the history, that's not factually accurate because we've had much higher growth rates in past years. Just a point of reference. Unemployment rate, yes, based on that's great. That's been great. Love the unemployment rate, but the wage growth has been stagnant, and that's just not under Trump, but that's been the case for the past 40 years. Wage growth has not kept up for the average worker. This has been a problem. That's not a Republican Democrat thing. It's just been consistent throughout the last few years based on those changes, the last decades, no matter who's in power. So anyway, we're at 50 minutes. I love that you guys are engaging. Appreciate that. Love that you're leaving comments. Appreciate you listening.
Yeah, me too.
No vitriol. I'm glad that there's no vitriol here. And let's have a debate. I think we need to talk to each other. We need to discuss these matters because a very low percentage of Americans feel we're going in the right direction right now. And the only way we're ever going to work it out is if we discuss it and work on it and
awareness.
Have discussions about and awareness. Yeah. So appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. What exactly do we owe? You think he's talking? Steve, are you talking about the
who exactly do we owe?
Oh, who exactly do we owe? I mean, the debt, our debt. I wonder. It's bondholders of our debt.
We owe it to the value of the dollar, Steve. That's who we owe it to. In a fiat currency system, we just keep printing more. It keeps going down. So we owe it to the value of the dollar.
Well, the one thing that we are Tammy says she's a retail interior designer. I'm doing twice the business than 2 years ago. I'm doing better than this year, despite being closed for you. So good for you, Tammy. Good for you. Anyway, we're past our 50-minute mark.
Time for lunch.
All right, man. Thank you all for watching.
I'll call you in a few, man.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
all right.
Thank you guys.
Wolf. See you next time.
Peace. Be well.